Real stories, real people.
My wife Mara and I own a small corn farm just outside Buckley, Nebraska. We've lived here our entire lives. Our nearest neighbors, George and his wife, are half a mile away, and the other farms stretch even farther. Life here is quiet, predictable, even until that night in late August. It was raining softly, just enough to make the porch lights glow in the mist. George and his wife had come over earlier for board games and drinks. When they left around 11, we poured one last glass of wine, sat on the couch, and let the storm hum outside. We were half asleep when a loud knock echoed through the house. It was deep, deliberate, not the sound of a neighbor's friendly tap. Mara turned down the TV, eyes wide. Then a muffled voice through the door. "We need help." My first thought was that someone's car had broken down on the county road. Out here, you help people when they're stranded. But something about the voice didn't sit right, too slow, too careful, like someone rehearsing how to sound harmless. I stood up and asked, "Who is it?" The voice answered, "My wife and I. We're lost." "Where's your wife?" I asked. A pause followed. Then the same voice, quieter. "She's not beside me right now." That's when the tone changed. It wasn't pleading anymore, it was flat, controlled. Mara shook her head, whispering for me not to answer again. I looked toward the window and thought I saw a faint shadow moving past the porch railing. The rain muffled everything, but the floorboards creaked like someone pacing just outside. I tried to calm Mara, whispering, "It's probably just George messing with us." I grabbed my phone and called him. After 3 rings, he answered, his voice groggy, confused. He was home. My chest tightened. Whoever was outside wasn't George. Then came another knock, harder this time. "We just need to use your phone," the voice said, almost polite. That was enough. I yelled, "If you don't leave now, I'll call the police." Mara already had 911 on the line, her hand shaking. We heard footsteps moving along the porch, slow, deliberate steps circling toward the side of the house. Then one stopped under the kitchen window. The handle rattled once, testing it. Mara gasped and covered her mouth. I shouted again, this time louder, "Leave now or I'll shoot!" The sound of the rain filled the silence that followed. I ran upstairs, grabbed my old shotgun from the closet, and loaded 2 shells. By the time I came back down, the knocking had stopped. Only the rain remained. A few seconds later, there was another knock, but this time it was George's voice shouting my name. I opened the door, shotgun still in hand. George stood there, soaked, holding his own rifle. He'd driven over the moment I called. We searched the yard with our flashlights, sweeping across the corn rows and muddy tracks. Nothing. No footprints except our own. No tire marks on the gravel road. It was like whoever had been here just dissolved into the rain. The sheriff arrived 30 minutes later. He checked the perimeter, asked a few questions, then told us to install cameras, just in case. I remember how calm he sounded, as if this kind of thing happened all the time. When he left, the porch light flickered, and Mara locked every window twice. Neither of us slept that night. Every creak, every gust of wind through the corn made us jump. Out here, darkness doesn't just fall, it settles. The next morning, muddy prints led from the back deck into the cornfield. They stopped abruptly about 20 feet in, as if the person had vanished mid-step. The sheriff came back later, took a few photos, and said the rain had washed away anything useful. I remember standing there, staring into the endless rows of corn, thinking how something could stand just beyond sight, so close, and you'd never know. We installed cameras that same afternoon, one facing the porch and another toward the field. For weeks, nothing happened. Then one night, around the same hour, a motion alert buzzed on my phone. The footage showed the porch empty, except the sensor kept triggering. The next morning, I checked the deck. On the wood, faint and smeared by dew, was the shape of a single handprint. It was too large to be mine. We've lived here all our lives and never once locked the front door until that night. Now, every evening before bed, I check the latch twice. We never found out who came knocking or what they wanted. Sometimes I still wake to the sound of rain and imagine a voice outside whispering, "We just need to use your phone." Out here, surrounded by miles of corn and silence, you learn something important. Sometimes the scariest thing isn't what breaks in, but what never leaves. My grandparents owned a modest cattle farm in eastern Kansas, about 20 miles from the nearest town. I grew up spending summers there, learning how to fix fences, drive the old tractor, and feed the cows at dawn. That summer, in 2016, they asked me to stay a few nights alone while they visited family out of state. It wasn't the first time I'd been left in charge, and I liked the quiet. The fields stretched forever, the air smelled of soil and hay, and the only sound at night was the slow humming of crickets and distant thunder. On the second night, I was watching TV when I heard something odd outside. It wasn't the wind or the usual rustling of corn. It sounded like a low murmur, almost voices. Then, the cows began to moo, all at once. That never happened. Usually one or two made noise, but now it was the entire herd. My stomach tightened. I muted the TV and listened. The sound came from the direction of the cornfield, just beyond the barn. I grabbed a jacket and went for the door. Before I even stepped outside, one sharp, terrified moo broke through the noise, then silence. Everything stopped at once. My hand trembled on the doorknob. Something was wrong. I ran to my grandfather's bedroom and pulled out his hunting rifle from under the bed. He'd always said, "Out here, son. You don't wait to find out what's making the noise." I loaded a round, took a deep breath, and stepped into the night. The air felt heavy, thick with the smell of wet earth. The barn doors creaked as I pushed them open. Inside, the cows shuffled nervously, eyes wide and reflective in my flashlight beam. I counted them. One was missing. The rope that usually held it in place was lying loose on the ground. My heart began to race. Then, from outside the barn, came the faint sound of something moving through the corn, slow, deliberate, like footsteps trying not to be heard. I raised the rifle and stepped toward the door. I fired 2 rounds into the air, just to make sure whoever or whatever it was knew I wasn't kidding. The echo rolled across the field and disappeared into the corn. For a few seconds, everything went still. Even the cows stopped moving. Then I heard it again, voices, whispering low, coming from deep inside the field. It wasn't English. It wasn't anything I recognized. The sound rose and fell like chanting. I felt a chill crawl up my neck. I stepped into the field. The rows closed around me, tall and dense, smelling of soil and rain. My boots sank into the mud. The whispering grew louder, now it was all around me. Then, between the stalks ahead, I saw someone standing still, dressed in black, face hidden behind a pale mask. I shouted, "Get off this property!" They didn't move. I fired another round into the air. The figure didn't flinch. That's when I realized there were more of them, at least half a dozen shapes between the rows, perfectly still. My throat went dry. The figure in front took a slow step forward, hands slightly raised like it wanted me to lower the gun. I began backing up, heart pounding so hard it hurt. Then they started chanting again, low and rhythmic, overlapping voices from every direction. It didn't sound human anymore. I turned and ran, crashing through the stalks until I could see the barn lights again. I fired several shots behind me, just to make them stop. When I finally reached open ground, I froze. In the middle of the field, right where the missing cow should have been, something was arranged in a circle, candles flickering despite the wind, and in the center, the severed head of a cow. I felt bile rise in my throat. The chanting stopped. The field went silent again, as if nothing had happened. I stumbled backward toward the house, dropped the rifle twice before making it to the porch. I called 911 with shaking hands. The operator promised to send someone, but I knew it would take at least half an hour. I called my parents next. Dad said he'd be there as soon as he could. I sat in my grandfather's room, the rifle across my lap, listening for footsteps outside. The minutes dragged like hours. Finally, red and blue lights flashed through the window. I ran outside and met the deputy halfway down the drive, barely able to speak. The deputies found the candles, the skull, and dozens of boot prints leading into the field, but none coming out. They called in a search team, but no one was ever caught. My grandparents installed security cameras afterward and never left the farm unattended again. Sometimes, when I visit, I swear I can still hear faint voices from the corn after dark. Out here, the fields hold more than crops. Sometimes, they hold what people leave behind. My parents own a small family farm, about 30 miles outside of Enid, Oklahoma. It's quiet, surrounded by miles of cornfields and dusty gravel roads that turn to mud after every storm. That summer, my folks took a week-long trip for their anniversary, leaving me and my 2 younger sisters in charge. We weren't worried just 3 nights alone on the farm. We had 2 big shepherd dogs outside, and I kept one of my dad's rifles loaded, just in case, like he always said. Back then, I didn't think those words would mean much. It was late when things started getting strange. My sisters were upstairs watching a movie while I sat in the living room half asleep, the glow of the TV flickering on the walls. The dogs outside began barking, not just barking, but panicking. Deep, guttural growls followed by frantic yelps. I muted the TV and went to the back door. The night was still, humid, and quiet. Then, from the edge of the cornfield, came a sharp whistle, one long note, almost playful. At first, I thought it might be some drunk farmhand cutting across the property, but that whistle, it didn't sound right. Too deliberate, too steady. The dogs wouldn't stop barking. I stepped onto the porch and shouted, "Who's out there?" Silence. Then, another whistle, shorter this time, like a reply. The dogs turned toward the sound, tails stiff, teeth bared. I ran back inside, grabbed the rifle, and loaded around. My sisters came downstairs, wide-eyed, asking what was going on. They told me not to go outside, and maybe they were right, but I couldn't just stay put with someone out there. I stepped into the yard, rifle in hand, and the dogs quieted for a moment, ears pointing straight toward the field. The air was thick with the smell of dust and corn. "If someone's out there," I shouted, "you better get moving." Then I fired a warning shot into the sky. The echo rolled far into the distance, and for a while, there was nothing but silence. We went back inside, laughing nervously about it, pretending it was nothing. But 10 minutes later, the dogs went off again, louder this time, almost hysterical. I ran back to the door and froze. A man was standing at the edge of the cornfield, barely visible in the moonlight. He was still, facing the house. I yelled, "Hey!" He turned, then bolted straight into the corn. I fired another round into the air and ran to where he'd been standing, but he was gone. I didn't chase him. I'm not that stupid. Instead, I brought the dogs inside, locked every door, and told my sisters to stay in their rooms. I called Dad and explained everything. He told me to keep the lights off, stay quiet, and be ready to fire if anyone came close. I sat by the window, watching the field. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Then, just before midnight, I heard it again, the whistle. But this time, it came from right behind the house. The sound sent a chill through me. It was right outside my window, low and mocking. I raised the rifle, heart pounding, and opened the curtain just enough to peek out. A man was walking slowly across the grass, toward the house, head tilted upward as if looking straight at me. Even through the darkness, I could tell he was smiling. I fired once into the dirt beside him. He flinched, turned, and ran back toward the field without a word. The rest of the night crawled by. None of us slept. Every time I started to nod off, one of the dogs would growl low from the hallway. Just before sunrise, I stepped outside. The field was quiet again, covered in dew and morning fog. I walked to where I'd fired the last shot. There were footprints in the mud, long, deep prints that stopped suddenly a few feet from the stalks, as if the man had vanished into thin air. Dad got home later that day. We searched the field together but found nothing. No trash, no tracks, no signs of anyone. That night, I replayed everything in my head. The whistle, the man's slow walk, the smile. It all felt too deliberate, like a game meant to scare us. Dad left a loaded shotgun by the door and told me to keep the dogs close at night. I didn't argue. A week passed with no more sounds, no more strange visitors. But even now, when the wind moves through the corn at night, it whistles high and clear, almost human. Sometimes, I catch myself listening for it, waiting for that same rhythm to come back. I used to love the stillness of the farm. Now, every quiet night feels like it's holding its breath, waiting for something to call back from the field.